Okay. All right. So welcome and welcome, Michael Strong. Um, you're a man of many talents and interests, but today I want to talk about education as an interest. And let me just start from your own education. What kind of school did your parents send you to?
First, my parents were uneducated. My mom was a high school dropout. My dad was an elevator repairman. And so I went to the local public school in Denver until I was 10. And then we moved to Minnesota and I went to a rural public school in northern Minnesota till the middle of my junior year. And then our farm was failing. So we moved in with my grandparents into a trailer house in Aspen. My last year and a half were in Aspen, Colorado at the public school there.
Okay, so in all cases, it was just a public school and
Yep.
you survived.
Yep.
But now you have different views. When did you start to form different views about what a school should be?
So my junior year of high school, I had a teacher who had a small discussion class where we discussed Plato, Nietzsche, Buber, that kind of thing. I loved it. I discovered St. John's College, known as a great books college, 4 years of reading, discussing the classics. And I was going to drop out of my, you know, skip senior year of high school and go directly to St. John's, but I only had 2 credits to go. So I basically went skiing and worked 20 hours a week my senior year of high school. And then because I had good test scores, I had a high school counselor who said, hey, you should apply to the Ivy Leagues. And so I applied to Harvard, Dartmouth, and Yale and got in. I went to Harvard. But midway through my Harvard freshman year, I wanted to go back to St. John's. So I managed to get credit for a year away at St. John's, like a year abroad. The sociologist David Reisman supported me in that. And then I went to St. John's and I loved it. I just love Socratic dialogue. I love reading and thinking about ideas. And so I find lectures incredibly boring, even at Harvard or wherever. To this day, if I go to a conference, I skip all the lectures. I go socialize with people at lunch and dinner and cocktails. But I have no patience for lectures.
Yeah, well, I think you and I have a lot in common despite some very different backgrounds. But yeah, I have no patience for monologues, including my own. Um, yeah. Okay, so when did you first start some alternative get involved as an educator?
Sure. So I went to graduate school at the University of Chicago. Just because you're a free market guy, this is relevant. At St. John's, I decided that I loved political philosophy and loved philosophy of science. So I went to the University of Chicago because the Chicago economists pretended to be scientists, and I knew that they were wrong because they believed in evil free markets. So I went there to prove the Chicago economists wrong, gradually discovered that I didn't understand economics. But while I was there, I began leading Socratic seminars in Chicago public schools under Mortimer Adler's Paideia project. So this is the late 1980s. And I felt like I was liberating prisoners. I'd go into a inner city Chicago classroom. We'd read a story, I'd ask a question, and the kids were so alive and vibrant. It was a blast. That led
What was a typical story you would read?
I remember I read The Monkey's Paw. It's kind of a classic old story. Um, but back in those days, there was no concern about woke. So just, the normal fiction, short stories, Ray Bradbury, obviously good stuff. Um, O. Henry, classic stories, Mark Twain, back when people read regular stories. There was always lots to talk about. And ask an open-ended question that would get the kids thinking. The basic, I would say basic difference between what we do in Socratic seminars and standard teacher discussions is in most classroom discussions, the teacher is looking for an answer and waiting to see if the students give them the right answer or not. What makes this engaging is we ask questions and then ask the children to reason. Actually, as another relevant aside, I once had a rabbi come and observe my Socratic discussions, and he said, this is just like what we did at Talmudic school, endless interpretation of texts, endless argumentation. I think the tradition of arguing about texts is valuable and underappreciated.
Okay, so very early, so while you're in, I guess, grad school at the time,
Yep. Yep.
you're doing this on the side. Um, okay, so then what happened? What was your next entry into education
Yeah.
stuff?
So I had the Alaska Paideia project, one of the pieces of the National Paideia Project, state initiative,
Sorry,
received
what project are we talking about?
Paideia. Paideia is the Greek term for education and culture. One way to think about this is that Paideia was the basic model of education from about, um, 500 BC to 300 AD, something like that. When people had this ideal of discovering the true, the good, and the beautiful by discussion. All the various schools of philosophic thought in the Greco-Roman world can be seen as this tradition of arguing about ideas. But it was the modern version of Paideia was named after that traditional Greco-Roman classical tradition. And then Mortimer Adler, who's of course a very famous 20th century person. I assume you know who he is just because it's sad to be old enough to know that we can take certain references in common and other people can't. But Mortimer Adler was a very famous part of Robert M. Hutchins, the great books of the Western world. Adler did the great books and junior great books, and Paideia was his public school reform initiative, where we were going to bring the Socratic seminar tradition into public schools. So that was the initiative nationally that I got started in Chicago, which was where Adler was based. And then in Alaska, they hired me to train teachers to do this, initially in Homer, Alaska, which is a small artsy fishing town on the coast, spectacularly beautiful. So I was there for 2.5 years training teachers on a grant. Then I went to Anchorage and spent another year there training teachers to lead Socratic seminars. We were on grant money. When the grant money ran out, some parents loved what we were doing, so they asked me to create a private school. So at that
Hey, can
point,
you just back up a second? How did your teaching of teachers take? Did you get a sense that they
they loved it. Again, most teachers, give you a modern data point for why many teachers like this. 75% of high school students are unhappy in school. 2/3 are not engaged in learning. And this is decades old. In the 90s, there was an article showing that only 10% of students in science classes were engaged. Outside of the honors track, most high school students are tuned out. I mean, Beavis and Butthead is a reality. So if you can get kids engaged and lively and participating, that's a big win. And so the teachers loved it, the parents loved it, and so that's why when we ran out of grant money, some parents asked me to start a private school in Anchorage. And so at that point, I had never taken an education course. I'd never worked as a full-time teacher, only a teacher trainer. And I remember parents wrote meeting a $20,000 check to ask so that I could do a business plan to create a private school in Anchorage. So that's how I became an accidental education entrepreneur, was parent demand.
okay? And so what happened there?
So while I was getting that school up and running with my colleagues who'd also lost their jobs from the Alaska Paideia Project, a somebody who ran a Montessori school in San Antonio found me. At this point, I was writing and talking about Socratic seminars and my experiences. And somebody had heard
Are we
me,
into the 1990s yet, or where
yeah,
are
we're
we?
into the 1990s. So I was in Alaska from 1990 to 1994. And then Jim Judson, who ran the Judson Montessori School at the time, now the Montessori School of San Antonio, basically recruited me to come to San Antonio to create a Montessori high school. And just the connection between the Montessori and the Socratic is Montessori emphasizes the independence of the child in the younger ages, and we emphasize intellectual independence. As children get older, of course, they become much more abstract rather than concrete. And they also become much more social. And so the whole Socratic seminar strand was an appropriate secondary school sequel to Montessori Elementary. So I moved my family. I had 2 children at the time, and we all moved down to San Antonio, where my job was to create a Montessori high school for the Judson Montessori School.
was there such a thing as a Montessori high school at all before then?
Very little. So quickly on Maria Montessori, 100 years ago, first female doctor in Italy, created the Montessori method, was an international celebrity, came to United States, I believe, in 1913. Thomas Edison supported her, Helen Keller, really a big celebrity. And there was a burst of Montessori schools in the US in the teens and 20s. Then a Columbia University professor basically wrote an article saying it was garbage and killed the Montessori movement in the US. Meanwhile, when Mussolini took over in Italy, Montessori and Mussolini didn't get along, so eventually he kicked her out. She ended up spending the 30s and 40s in India, came back to Holland in after the war, and the Montessori movement in Holland had continued. So there was a Montessori high school in Holland in the 30s, which I believe has survived up to today, and then really just a handful. One thing that people don't realize, of course, is that Montessori education is not aligned with standard government education. So there are two Stanford scholars who talk about the grammar of schooling. And the basic grammar of schooling consists of the fact that most places around the world, schooling consists of third grade math and seventh grade social studies, four quarters and report cards, textbooks and grades, all of that, basically what school is. Insofar as Maria Montessori had mixed ages together, students could progress at their own rate. Her whole method was not consistent with the grammar of schooling. So I would say government schooling basically stalled the Montessori movement for a long time. In the late 1950s, an American woman brought Montessori back to the US and started what became the American Montessori Society. A bunch of preschools were started in the 60s and into the 70s, gradually elementary schools in the 70s and 80s. When I got involved in the 90s, there were quite a few middle schools, late 80s and early 90s. And then gradually, really, it's late 90s and aughts when we start to see high schools. And a lot of that is, it takes a while. When somebody does A/B testing on the computer, you can do, hundreds of millions instantly. With education, every year is, one test. You get a program to test this year. You can make tiny tweaks, but then you really don't change it until the following year. And the Montessori movement, being mostly outside the public system, relies on people, usually mom and pop entrepreneurs creating these little schools. I calculated years ago the average Montessori guide, they call them guides rather than teachers, sacrifices about $200,000 in lifetime earnings vis-a-vis a public school teacher. So, these people have made progress. There are about 5,000 Montessori schools in the US today, 20,000 globally.
Maybe
The
you
movement's made
know
progress
that, maybe you
against
know
too much.
this, or maybe you don't, but wasn't it the case, maybe, and I hope I don't have this wrong, that Sergey Brin and Larry Page were Montessori
Big time.
people?
Yep.
So that raises the question, sort of, what's the causality here? Is it like you have very open-minded parents, who are willing to go against the grain, and that therefore you're going to have very open-minded kids? Or is there something about the Montessori method itself that's going to create creative, bring the creativity out in people?
So obviously it's synergies, dual causality, multiple causality, but I'm a big fan of John Taylor Gatto. Gatto was New York State Teacher of the Year, won his award, I believe, in 1991. And then he argued then and since that he's dead now, that standard education is training in how to be obedient and passive. And insofar as Montessori rewards initiative, I would make the case that Montessori kids are on balance more likely to take initiative. And creativity might be seen as adjacent to initiative. Give you one anecdote. Later on, I created Montessori middle schools in Palo Alto, and half the students had come up through the Montessori school, half the middle school students had come from public school. And no matter how bright, and it was 20,000 a year, this is 25 years ago, so maybe something like 30,000 a year today. No matter how bright and well-behaved the kids were for public school, they did not know how to get started on their own. They were passive. We had to basically train them in a Montessori classroom, students were expected to pick their work from among several options and set their own goals and achieve their own goals. kind of like an adult, an adult in a workplace, a professional workplace is expected to be goal-oriented and get things done without being told what to do every minute of the day. And certainly Montessori kids can do that. After a semester or a year, non-Montessori kids could be trained to do that. But there's a huge behavioral shift for those who have come up through Montessori versus not.
Hmm.
One other quick anecdote, while I was at the Palo Alto Montessori School, we had two Stanford seniors who had gone to the Montessori school I'd previously been at in San Antonio come and speak to us at the Palo Alto Montessori School. And they said, look, the kids who went to public school had just as good an academic preparation as we did. So absolutely no academic advantage. But they said we were much more comfortable talking to adults. So they said as freshman year, they'd be going and talking to their professors and hanging out and really engaging in a way that they thought was highly beneficial. So I think a lot of soft skills, initiative, creativity, ability to talk freely with adults are some of the benefits that plausibly accrue to Montessori.
Okay. Well, I might come back with another question about that, but so we left you in the 1990s doing your Montessori high school in San Antonio, right?
I love the fact that you're as sequential as I am. Often when I do these deviations, I'm inclined to go back and be sequential. So yeah, I was there. It turned out this was my first experience that one should interview one's boss and not just be interviewed by one's prospective boss, because it turned out the institution was not ready to build a high school. My boss had brought me in under the pretext that I would help with development, fundraising. I had absolutely no interest or experience in fundraising. So I had to kind of pretend to be a fundraising person while trying to persuade the board to create a high school. And, people liked me there. I worked in the K program doing Socratic seminars with children grades 3 through 14, but they weren't ready. In the meantime, somebody, actually, Winston Ling, who's a somewhat famous Brazilian libertarian, was in South Florida, and he wanted to create a school for highly gifted children, including, of course, his own children. So he's a wealthy libertarian. His father had left Mao and came to Brazil in the 40s and planted the first soybeans, basically created the soybean industry in Brazil. And Ling is an objectivist. He and his family have established objectivist institutions in Brazil. But he liked the fact that I was free market and very much, when I do Socratics, one of the things that's unusual is I read very difficult texts with kids. So 6th, 7th, and 8th graders were reading Plato and Shakespeare. That's something that evolved after I left Chicago, is reading more difficult texts. So he liked that. And then we were working with an absolutely incredible math program there, which, among other things, had kids going into Harvard at a junior Harvard level math major with a very abstract math curriculum. And so we had extremely bright students there. We had students taking AP science courses, getting 4s and 5s in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So extremely academically advanced. It's interesting. Winston, thought that parents would be all over this extremely advanced academics. By the second year, we had about 40 students. We had one Anglo student, one Hispanic student, and all the rest of the students were Jewish or Asian, without exception. So there was a certain population that was very into the advanced academics. But yeah, that program, Winston had his own views on how to manage it. And so he and I had some differences. We're friendly now, but we had some differences. And so that's when I was recruited to create the Montessori middle schools in Palo Alto. It was one in Palo Alto and one in Pleasanton. So I moved to Palo Alto and created Montessori middle school programs in Palo Alto and Pleasanton.
Okay, all right. And then what next?
Just one other anecdote from that one. At one point, the CFO of Pixar at the time came and visited, and he saw the kids all working independently in their cubicles and, taking initiative to do their own work. And he said, "This is how I want my employees to work. How do you get this to happen?" Which is great from the CFO of Pixar. Then I had a former classmate of St. John's who was starting a charter high school in Angel Fire, New Mexico. And so I moved there to create the charter high school there. This was in a remote valley. It was about 30 miles from the local public school. a teenager had died driving to school the year before. So the community very much wanted a local school. And it was based, they years ago, ago, they'd had a public school in this high mountain valley, but then it had closed and school consolidation. Let's, ship the kids off to the big school down the valley. So the community was really eager to have their own high school. We started there with, I think, 70 students. By the time I left, we had 130. There were no advanced placement programs at the time. Somebody from UNM Taos came over and said, there's no way you can do an AP program because Northern New Mexico students are not capable of it. New Mexico is one of the poorest ranked states in the union academically. People joke that it's Louisiana with a Hispanic accent. But we created an AP program there. And by our second year, we were ranked 147th in the US based on AP results. In the third year, the 36th best public school based on AP results. When I went there, Governor was Gary Johnson, a Libertarian, so I needed no credentials. After I got there, Bill Richardson, a Democrat, got in, and the first thing he did was require that charter school principals all be licensed. It turns out in order to be licensed as a public school principal, I needed 7 years of experience as a licensed teacher. At this point, I had still never had a teaching license, and I needed to have an administrator's license. So I tried to get a waiver. So despite being ranked one of the best schools in the US, I was forced out because I didn't have a license.
Okay, so this is what year about?
2004.
Okay.
And then I went to Mercatus, and not Mercatus, IHS. I took a job as education director at the Institute for Humane Studies in Arlington, the sister institute to Mercatus. Shortly after I got there, I'd been interacting with John Mackey. So another loop, Gary Hoover was an entrepreneur who created Bookstop. It was the first big box bookstore. And his first bookstop was next to John Mackey's second Whole Foods. So they were Austin entrepreneurs in the 70s and 80s together. And Gary Hoover had gone to the University of Chicago, was a big Stigler fan. I'd end up studying under Becker. And so University of Chicago Magazine wrote a profile of Hoover. And he talked about how economics and education were his passions. I cold emailed him and said, economics and education are my passions. He and I had lunch, and he said he wanted to create the Target of education. And I said, I wanted to create the Whole Foods of education. He said, well, I know this guy. So he introduced me to John Mackey. John and I started talking. And my first lunch, I was hoping to get John to fund me in my education projects. But it became clear that what John and I really had in common is we'd both come from the left and had become libertarians. And so we created what became Flow, Freedom Lights Our World. The idea was, instead of being against taxes and regulations, as most libertarians are, we were for entrepreneurial solutions. And the whole idea was basically to package libertarianism in kind of a left-friendly way, kind of friendly to the left cultural norms. And I don't know at what point you started connecting with me, Arnold, but you may have known me a little bit back in the Flow days.
Sure. Okay, so when do you get back into education then? Because after this
So
detour with Mr. Mackey.
yeah, well, the detour and Mr. Mackey, quickly, for me, the biggest entrepreneurial solution were, poor countries are poor because of bad law and governance. I got interested in people working in the special economic zone industry. I started speaking, writing articles, and ultimately created a business to create new zones with higher quality law and regulation, so that
Okay, but that's a detour now.
that's a huge detour.
Let's get us back. Get you.
Okay,
When
so
did you get back to
anyway,
education?
after the Honduras thing failed in 2012, then I got back into education in 2013. I'd been on the board of a school here in Austin earlier in the century, and the man who led that school and had founded it had been kicked out by his board. And so he and I had decided to start a new private school here in Austin. It was called Co-School. We got it going in 2014. And so I created Co-School in Austin 2014. I think it was in 2017, Higher Ground Education, the largest Montessori network in the US, liked the model. They hired me to create a Montessori high school model for them. And so I moved to Palo Alto not Palo Alto, San Francisco, where I created the Academy of Thought and Industry. We had campuses in San Francisco, New York, St. Louis, and we took over the Coast School in Austin. So we had 4 campuses. After a couple of years with Higher Ground and the Academy of Thought and Industry, COVID hit. When COVID hit, everyone was complaining about how bad virtual education was. Turns out dialogue works pretty well online. So I created what is now the Socratic Experience in fall of 2020, initially with 3 students on my credit card for my personal network. Then I started raising capital, now 1.7 million capital raised. We've got 140 students and yeah, 3rd year of operation going into our 4th year.
Okay, so walk me through a typical day at a Socratic Experience school.
Sure. So it's a little bit complicated. So I'll start with, and part of this is we're flexible. We personalize to a radical degree. So I'll start with the core program, then go to electives, and then go to various adjacent options. So our core program consists, and this is Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. Wednesday will be electives. Our core program consists of a 2-hour Socratic humanities block and 2-hour STEM block. The humanities, everything's 15 to 1 on Zoom. Humanities starts with personal growth, where we discuss, how do you set goals? How do you learn from your mistakes? What do you do if you're not getting along with your friends? Those kind of issues. Kids love talking about them once we
So
approach.
what age do we have? What do we have
So
here?
we're doing grades 3 through 12. Right now I'm doing kind of the middle school, and then I'll do a high school variation in a minute.
And are
So
you mixing ages the way they do in Montessori?
we do. So grades 3 to 5 are we call it the novice program. We can have an upper novice and a lower novice. The middle school, grades 6 through 8, and there's kind of a more advanced and less advanced. And then high school, grades 9 through 12. Again, placement is based more on ability and maturity and sometimes interests than grade level. So if we have a student who's doing 9th grade math, but is in 6th grade, they might be in 6th grade humanities, and we bump them up to 9th grade math. So everything is based on how capable and mature you are.
Okay.
But yeah, so Socratic Humanities starts with the hour of personal growth, then we take a little break, and then we're discussing classical texts from around the world. We do China, India, Greece, Rome. We do Christian texts. We've done a bit of Islam. Classic texts from around the world. Very difficult, lots of philosophy, some poetry, literature, and so forth. In high school, we do history. Kids love to think, talk, and argue, and then we use that to teach writing. So we teach writing roughly 1 day a week. Then the guides also provide feedback on Google Docs, and the writing all comes out of the students arguing. One thing that I often, a lot of kids hate writing. I now say I love learning, I hate school. I thought language arts classes were the silliest. Write on the symbolism of blah, blah, blah. I didn't see the point at all. But to give you kind of a different example, we've had students read 2 essays from Yale on should we bring the woolly mammoths back from extinction or not. One set of scholars, yes, because of this science research, oh no, ecological disaster, whatever. But the kids get passionate arguing about it. And after they've been arguing with their friends, they have definite opinions about why we should or should not bring the woolly mammoths back from extinction or under what conditions. And that serves as the way to generate ideas. I write, and I think 95% of writing is thinking. Once you have your ideas clear, the writing is work, but it's different. So we spend a lot of time arguing, thinking, and then the kids write, and then we coach them around the writing. So that's the Socratic Humanities block, then an hour off for lunch. And Socratic STEM has several pieces. We do a hard problem solving. There are also brain teasers, logic puzzles, sometimes SAT math problems, sometimes math competition problems. What I like about math competition problems for middle school, so the MAA problems, is they don't require more advanced mathematics. You just have to kind of think about an interesting way to attack this particular problem. I'm very big on how to solve it. Georg Polya's How to Solve It. So some math problem solving, and then sometimes we do some more science problem solving. Sometimes some science Socratics, where we read articles about what is evidence, how do scientists decide, what is science, those sorts of things. And then finally, we have the standard sequential math curriculum, 6th grade math, 7th grade math, 8th grade math, algebra 1, yada, yada, yada. And for that, we use apps. We give students a choice of MathSpace or Khan Academy. Students set goals with a default expectation. It's 1 year of math per year, but our top 20% of students are doing 2 years of math per year easily. And then some students need more help and they may not get their math done there during the year. We have math tutors available over the summer, and so they just keep working on math. Quickly on the math, one of the things, our staff is international. So we've got people with bachelor's and master's degrees from overseas who are very affordable. We pay them in the top 90th percentile, but they make what would be below minimum wage in the US. So we get high quality math tutors. We can afford one-on-one math tutoring because we're using international wage arbitrage, basically.
Okay, are you ever going to explore using the new AIs for any of
So
this?
when they use Khan Academy, Khanmigo is already part of that. All the adaptive math apps are using AI. And, it's okay. I talk to students who are using it, and even it's gotten better. Last fall, the AI was making a lot more mistakes. Now it's making fewer mistakes. But when a student is doing this self-paced math, they've got a choice between kind of, look up how to solve the problem. They can ask the AI how to solve the problem, or they can ask a human. And I would say what we're finding is students do a range of all three, different students on different problems. So the way I see AI is it's a great supplement. It's not clear that it's a magic, transformative thing at present. It is more effective for students who are already motivated to do math. So our students that are flying through 2 years of math per year are more likely to use the Khan AI math tutor, but they still ask adults, human beings, for some things. So that's the core program, 4 hours a day. Wednesdays are electives. We have a lot of digital skills. Our program is geared towards entrepreneurs, creators, and intellectuals. A lot of our kids are doing digital entrepreneurial projects. So we have audio engineering, video production, software development, generative AI, an entrepreneurship course, all sorts of things so that kids can learn skills that may be relevant to their various digital projects. And we also have things like yoga and relationships, and we have a after-school Spanish course. They can take Spanish if they want. I teach a purpose course after school. What do you love? What are you good at? What does the world need? What will the world pay for? In our programming course, we start with Python, but then we offer Harvard CS50. So if students want to take Harvard CS50, they can. We've had 8th graders complete Harvard CS50 successfully. So that's the sort of core program plus electives. And then beyond that, at high school, we can give high school credit for any course on Coursera, Udemy. We have ASU courses. So basically, students can take as many conventional high school and college courses as they want. And they have our high touch, very personal program. And then finally, every student has a mentor who meets with them 30 minutes every 2 weeks. And the mentor helps them figure out their goals. What do they want to do after high school? What math do they need to be doing? Time management. We use getting things done. And so we train students on how to not only manage their time, but to be productive. Our older students, we're using a productivity and project management platform. So you learn how to use that. And most of our students are doing cool entrepreneurial and creative projects that are based on their interests. It's not projects the teacher assigns it. So give you a couple of examples there. One of our students, his dad is in real estate, and he's a 12-year-old kid who's now, his dad does tax delinquent properties. So the son's project is to find tax delinquent properties and help identify which ones are good deals for his father to investigate further. And he manages a team of 12 overseas assistants. We're all going through, and they're using some AI to identify tax delinquent properties. Got another student who is working with influencers. He is recruiting them for a gaming company, and he was offered a position for $150,000 a year as a 16-year-old. Instead, he chose commission. He'll probably make over $200,000 this year on commission for bringing in influencers. These are, people with 20 million, 40 million followers. They seem to be doing nothing as far as I can tell, but that's the world. And these are the ad companies. You probably know, Mr. Beast has almost
Right.
200 million followers, more than order of magnitude bigger than the New York Times. So
So,
this is the new world of media.
Okay, so um, I want to give people a chance to ask questions. One question somebody raised is one that I was going to ask, which is, okay, so this is a lot of a virtual, it's a, it's a mostly virtual environment. Um, and you also have ways of getting people together, right?
Yeah, so I would say that is the single biggest demand, and the single biggest reason people leave our programs, they want to be together. So a couple of things. We've gone to Greece for the last 2 years. For those who could afford it, it was an extra $5,000. That was fabulous. Super cool to, see people in person. We tried to do a California camping trip this year, but didn't have enough interest. We have concentrations of students in New York, San Francisco, LA, South Florida, Austin, Atlanta. So they're getting together in person. But the next stage of development is I'm designing kind of a hybrid program where a number of different organizations have wanted an in-person experience, basically a micro school that they run, and then we pipe in part of the education. And so they would do physical experiences, art, kind of in-person cool things, and then we would pipe in our academic program so they don't have to worry about that. So that's kind of the next phase of development is to have a micro school experience that includes our virtual program, but then they have a local in-person experience.
Okay. All right. Before I raise any other questions, why don't I just do a check-in with the people who are here. If anyone wants to raise a virtual hand or an actual hand, well, I guess if you're going to raise an actual hand, you're going to have to show yourself online. Um, but okay, so Steve, go ahead, Steve W.
Yeah, I really like everything about the program you described. I'm curious and kind of know the answer to some of this or suspect it, but how scalable is it? And as a substitute for that, how duplicatable is it, repeatable in other markets?
Super good question. I'd say a couple of things. Um, I estimate that we can double an enrollment every year with pretty decent quality. That might be slightly ambitious, but plausible. And just a couple of things. One is in terms of guides, people hate teaching. You'll read articles all over the place about how much many people hate teaching. I get an inbound request for people who want to teach with us, a couple times a month without ever, no solicitation, no advertisement. But I would say intellectual people who want to work with kids see this, they love it, they reach out. Right now, most of my staff are St. John's graduates, but there are pipelines. How many people have, a master's degree in liberal arts who don't want woke and would love to teach an environment like this? Basically endless. So the staffing's not an issue. There's training and quality control. With quality control, actually, and that's my biggest concern with scaling is how do you do quality control? This is where AI is useful, but we record all our classes. And right now our quality control is spot checks on Zoom and parent surveys and so forth. But with AI transcripts, we can start to look at which classes are getting high evaluations and have higher parent satisfaction and begin looking for patterns. And then conversely, look for patterns associated with poorer performance. There's also a technology that allows us to evaluate who's interrupting whom, who's dominating which classes, who's influencing whom. There's another technology that allows us to measure psychological safety and emotional engagement. So basically, the scalability plan online is to use these various tools to identify high quality human interaction. The way I talk about it is just to rant a little bit. Ed tech, a lot of great things in ed tech. We use ed tech all over the place, but very few people have focused on the human side. I've talked to various ed tech entrepreneurs who might have, oh, let's add a chat function. But basically, the reason that kids want to be together is they want to interact. Teens crave human interaction. And so our specialty, our secret sauce is how to have very high quality human interaction. I would say we do warm and intellectual exceptionally well. And so with all of these various technologies, my interest is how do we evaluate high quality, warm human interaction? How do we ensure it's going in the right direction? How do we identify problems quickly and address them? So that's the kind of tech-enabled human interaction piece. Separately from that, I am looking at ways to scale this by means of creating a sort of turnkey operation, almost franchise, where people could do it in their local environments. I would have less quality control, but, with these various tools, we might be able to help, somebody setting this up in Denver with their own quality control. And then something else I'm looking at is Delphi.ai is something that allows anybody to train it on their own work. I have a lot of embedded knowledge in my head, and so I'm going to have Delphi.ai trained on all of my work and then also on all of our classes. And so the goal is to have an AI that can identify high quality dialogue patterns. Exactly where all of this goes, I don't know, but I think we have at this point in time really interesting tools for scaling tech optimized human interaction.
And what did you say your biggest barriers are? Like right now, if I could wave a magic wand and make one thing happen for you, what would you want that to be?
Customer acquisition. Right now we're paying Facebook, Meta, Facebook and Instagram $1,000 to bring in a customer. And that's ridiculous, and I know it's ridiculous. And so I'm looking at how to optimize creative. Actually, thanks to you, I reached out to Eric Torenberg. Maybe his network would be good, but I need to find a better way to get customer acquisition costs down. Because as we have, ever more robust program, ever better quality control, the next thing is customer acquisition. And if we can get that down, then we can scale quickly and profitably.
So if I get into your customer acquisition funnel, what's most likely to make me drop out and not go through the funnel? What are the things that stop people from?
Well, if we can get somebody, our basic secret sales technique is we can get students to sit in. About 70 to 80% of students. So the funnel is you click on a link, and then we capture your email address and phone number, and then we start reaching out to you. We get you on a call. If we get you on a call, then we try to get you to have your students do a shadow day. If they do a shadow day, then 60 to 70% chance we've got the sale, because most students hate school and they see this situation where we get to think, talk, and argue. They love it. So basically, it's a matter of how do we go from stranger on the internet to somebody who will set up a shadow day for their kid. One other nuance there, we've got 3 customer avatars. On the one hand, I mentioned the creative and entrepreneurial parents, and those are our best ones because they can usually pay full tuition. Then we've got homeschoolers. I love the homeschoolers. A lot of homeschoolers, when their kids get in high school, kids want to be more social, tired of being taught by mom. And so they're already aligned philosophically, but homeschoolers tend to be cheap. They don't want to pay the full tuition. So they're great customers in alignment, but don't pay the big bucks. And then finally, we get parents who are escaping the system because their kids maybe have learning differences, ADHD or dyslexia, or they've been bullied, or some other reason why they're escaping the system. And they may not understand it as much, but once we get them in, their kids are happy and things are good. So it really is, how do we go from an anonymous person, on Facebook, and of course we're targeting, but we need to target better, to somebody who's going to schedule a shadow day.
So, somebody who's competing with you may be able to get like voucher funds a lot more easily or something like that. Or what advantages do your competitors have that you wish you had?
That's a great question. First, with vouchers, we do have about a dozen voucher students from Arizona. Hurrah for Arizona. I think a lot of this is we're so different, and I see different as both an advantage and a disadvantage, but we're out of the box. That's why the parents who are already out of the box are a much easier sell. Going way back, when I was doing the school for highly gifted children, I said, hey, based on his test scores, your child can do 7th grade AP science for 7th grade. The parent said, but won't he miss 7th grade science? And for me, I hate to be mean, but who cares about 7th grade science if he's passing AP biology as a 13-year-old? But most parents are stuck in that grammar schooling framework. And basically my bet is that a growing demographic of parents are done with that. And I would say here in Austin, there are multiple models. There are my competitors. People are outside the box. But I think right now, all of us who are doing this, I would say agent-based schooling, we maybe make up 2% of students, and I'm happy to be, competing against Alpha and Acton and Montessori 10 years from now, where we had 30% of the market and we're competing with each other. So we're basically that early adopter stage of the technology adoption cycle, and we're all, how do we cross the chasm? So that's really about how do we get more people to understand the old system is unnecessary and this new system is better, and then the floodgates will open.
Okay. Anyone else want to either raise a virtual hand or an explicit hand? Okay. Yeah, I know some people typed some questions into the chat and I didn't follow them. Maybe I could.
Yeah, I'm going backwards. I didn't answer Paul. What is the single most effective intervention for improving future well-being or income of the median sixth grader in U.S. public school? Well, I'll start by saying I think the public schools are hopeless. And I hate to be mean, but I tried it, and even charter schools are more highly regulated. And I would say the accountability movement in public education has made it worse because insofar, 30 years ago, teachers had a lot more autonomy, and if students needed a more personal relationship they have, of course, there was less quality control. But I see the accountability movement in public education as analogous to seen like a state, where now the only thing the state sees are the test score metrics, which means that classroom teachers have less autonomy. I think this is part of the reason why so many teachers are unhappy and want to leave. And so I think we're at the point where I think public education is truly broken. I predict that in the next 10 to 20 years, we'll see a majority of students outside the system. Already, a majority of students do not go to zone public schools in Phoenix, Tucson, Gary, Indiana, Detroit, New Orleans, DC. And it's getting to the point where a minority of students go to zone public schools in Arizona and probably Florida. And with all the red states passing ESA legislation, within a decade, I think most students will be out of traditional public schools in those states.
But I think back to your earlier point, probably right now, the majority of them are going to schools that are really on this pretty much the same model as public schools, but just
That's
tweaked
true,
a
but
little bit.
I've probably known hundreds of homeschoolers. A very common pattern with homeschoolers is when they pull their kids out, they initially, maybe for the first couple of years, teach them the traditional curriculum, but gradually they realize it's completely unnecessary and they start giving them more freedom. Now, I would say high-level skills are great. You want very high-level reading, writing, math skills, but do you need to cover the state standards in everything? No, not at all. And especially when you can have more fun with your kids can do amazing entrepreneurial projects. Your kids can have a more fulfilling life. Basically most of the school day is irrelevant. I'll give you a different data point. Joe Lamont is a billionaire. He created Trilogy Software in the 90s. He now runs Alpha School, and this is his main project. He jokes that he's now a high school principal. But Alpha School is something they call 2-hour learning, which is basically math and language arts on apps. And the only academics they do at Alpha are 2 hours of app-based learning, and the rest of the day are basically student projects.
So, what do you think about sort of the social aspect of learning, of kids teaching each other and that kind of stuff? I think that would be a typical fear that a parent would raise about homeschooling or an alternative that's mostly virtual is like, oh, my kid will be behind socially, or they won't get the benefit of learning from other kids.
So certainly the social piece is tremendously important. I would say that because our classes are all high touch, high interaction, the kids become much more articulate. The kid who's now making 200,000, his dad would say it's because he learned how to become articulate through our program that he's so successful, that he can he can have these conversations. And so if your child is silent in a classroom in a traditional school and then goes out and is gossiping or is bullied during recess, what kind of socialization is that? And that's basically what homeschool parents say as well, is what kind of socialization are you really getting in most public schools? Not all. There's some great suburban public schools where the socialization is a positive experience, but it's largely negative for a lot of kids. So our socialization is very high touch verbal, and then just the kids teaching kids, kind of another whole riff. In 1800, Joseph Lancaster was a working class kid who created the Lancaster method, where kids teaching kids allowed him to get to student teacher ratios of 100 to 1, 500 to 1, 1,000 to 1. It spread around the world, Brazil, Russia, the Cherokees, India, and then basically public schooling, government schooling killed this system. And so we're very big on students mentoring and teaching other kids. I've got several graduates who want to work with me, and I'm designing kind of internships with them post-graduation because they love this kind of interaction. So we are exceptionally social, and I would say in many ways we provide a higher quality social experience than do the vast majority of public schools.
Okay, but this is all online.
All online unless they can get together in person, where when they can, that's great. So until we get the micro school movement going or larger concentrations in the cities, it's all online.
If you had, okay, Massimo, do you want to speak up, unmute? Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. No, I'll mute myself. I just had a quick question, Michael. You might know, my children in Arizona here are in basis schools, and I always wondered, like, basis always gets really high test rating scores, but is that because they've kind of unlocked the cheat code of having their students just be good test takers rather than kind of working on the Socratic methods or other Montessori schools that are around town that are less kind of testable in that quantitative sense?
So great question. First, just talking about math, basis is very advanced, in their math track. And I would say when we have students who do 2 years of math per year, that's the sort of student that profiles to go into basis. I think math education in the US is very slow compared to global standards. Most Europeans, most people from almost all countries, their kid transfers to the United States, they find, wow, the math pace is so slow here. So basis is kicking it up. I don't know if they pick the top 20% of students, but the top 20% of students or so can easily go much faster. And basis is pushing that. It's very aggressive, lots of homework. And so I think for academically oriented kids, it's great. I'm very much a market pluralist. Many of our students prefer to have more time to work on their entrepreneurial and creative projects. Some of them are math resources, but they can do it at their own pace and they don't need to have the nightly homework routine. So I would say it's more about flexibility. Motivation is almost everything in education. And if your kid is motivated in basis, go for it. If they're motivated to do something else, then they should have the freedom to do that. So I like to look at a kid and see what system is going to motivate them, because that's where they'll be optimized.
Okay. All right. I think, do you have any kind of, let's see. Did somebody else pop in with a question?
Yeah, somebody's asking, talk a bit about Trent. Go ahead.
Sorry, this is Paula. Yeah, I was thinking, Michael, can you talk a little bit about, you told us that amazing story about that one student that's already in demand, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about that transition.
Yeah, so first, backing up, our college admission strategy consists of great SAT scores, a few college courses, doing well on AP or college courses. Doesn't need to be 15, but 3 or something. And then great projects. And so, if the student has high enough SAT scores, and we administer the Free Khan Academy practice SAT 3 times a year, starting in grade 9, so they know where they're at on the SAT and can crank it up if that's their aspiration. But if they have high enough SAT scores and they've done well in a number of AP or college courses, then they've demonstrated to a university that they are of academic caliber to go to whatever the university is. And then Cal Newport wrote a book called How to Be a High School Superstar, which is a great book, but one of the things he talks about is these amazing projects. There's generally been a movement in college admissions away from packing your resume with, varsity sports, student council, volunteer work, yada, 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 and in favor of do one thing that's amazing. So we had a student who got into Stanford. He raised 1.2 million as venture capitalist as a 16-year-old, and had a team of 6 coders working on his Minecraft mod company. He also did well on the SAT and AP courses, but obviously Stanford wants a kid who's already a successful entrepreneur, as a 17-year-old. And so that's the way we think about it is, let's have these creative and entrepreneurial projects become something very substantial, which then is in itself a credential for college admissions. Just quickly on the direct to workplace, we do have students who go directly to the, especially software and digital marketing are the 2 biggest ones, because if you have high quality software skills or digital marketing skills, you don't need a college degree. You can go directly to the workplace, and then maybe later on, get a degree if you want to.
Okay. All right, if there are no other questions, do you have any final remarks you want to make before we? Oh, yeah.
No, just I would encourage people to explore this new world. I think the ESAs, Texas is almost certainly going to get an ESA program
Well,
passed.
sorry, what's an ESA?
Educational scholarship account. So Arizona pioneered the first one last year. 1.1 million students in Arizona had access to $7,500 each to go to any school, private school, homeschool, parochial school, whatever. Since then, it's been a red state wave. I believe 14 red states have passed this. So there's now an estimated 20 million students with access to these funds. When Texas passes its in the next legislative season, that's another 5 million students. So this is the largest change in education in the United States in a century. We are going to have 25 million students free to leave the system in the coming years. And so this is a really exciting time for innovation in education and also just diversity in education. And if anybody's interested in this, I'm passionate about all dimensions. Follow me on Substack, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. I would say Twitter, I'm especially active on the education stuff, and then my Substack goes into much sort of deeper issues associated with this. And of course, if you have a child who might be a good candidate, socraticexperience.com. We would love to help you, and we have part-time and full-time programs.
All right, thank you very much, Michael. I think everyone really enjoyed it, and I think we'll have a lot of people interested when we put this up online.
Terrific.
Yeah, thank you. That was wonderful.
You're welcome. Great to meet you. Take care, everyone.
Okay, all right.
Bye-bye.